The revolution's begun. The time to stand up has come. We are the rocking of the throne. We are the rocking of the throne.
I'm Victor Tiffany, the co-founder of Revolt Against Plutocracy, and I'm very excited today to be speaking to the author of What Happened to Bernie Sanders. He's the attorney, the lead attorney in the lawsuit against the Democratic National Committee, Jared Beck. Jared, thanks for joining me.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Victor.
First question I have basically is, who came up with this idea of launching this lawsuit to try to get this money back from people who thought they were donating money to a fair fight?
Well, you know, it's an interesting story, and I go through all the details in my latest book, What Happened to Bernie Sanders, which really describes the genesis of the lawsuit and the litigation up to the time the book was published in March of this year. But in a nutshell, here's what happened. My wife and I were big Bernie supporters. We had actually created our own organization, which was technically a super PAC, but in reality, it was just me and my wife, with the idea of funding videos in support of the Bernie Sanders campaign. And this was in the beginning of 2016. And we were also, my wife especially, was doing what they called burn storms at our law office and organizing, phone banking, stuff like that. So we were, very much behind the Bernie Sanders campaign. And I believe it was March of 2016, we began to get some very, troubling reports about how the DNC was fixing the primaries in various ways. And, we were getting reports of irregularities at the polls, things like that. A gentleman by the name of Nico House actually came into our office in Miami in March of that year, and he provided firsthand evidence of really, duplicitous tactics being exercised by the DNC against the Bernie Sanders campaign, people with, obviously divided loyalties, things like that. I won't go too much into the detail, but that put us in a position in June of 2016, and this was after the first really important set of documents came into the public domain, showing how the DNC was biased in favor of Hillary Clinton. And that, of course, was actually not the WikiLeaks documents, but the Guccifer 2.0 documents. When those documents hit the public domain, there was almost an instantaneous interest in pursuing some type of legal action against the DNC by people like us and around the country who had put so much time and energy into the Bernie Sanders campaign, not to mention their hard-earned money coming to $250 million in donations. So we were very well positioned, having been through it ourselves and being lawyers practicing civil litigation, to answer people's questions. And it was sort of from that milieu, so to speak, that the lawsuit took shape and became a class action against the DNC.
So, did Donna Brazil's book come out after you had submitted your manuscript?
I think it had already come out as I was putting the finishing touches on the manuscript. And I cited either it had come out or the Politico article, which published, a large chunk of it had come out. And I actually tried to work that in to the manuscript. That was, a huge moment, at least in the media narrative about what happened.
Right. Did you learn anything reading that political argument that you didn't already know?
I think some of the details, specifically the specific arrangement that she had uncovered, tying the Hillary Clinton campaign to the DNC. I mean, that particular arrangement, as she described it, that was sort of new. I mean, I don't think there was anything extraordinarily new, except that this was actually coming from the mouth of Donna Brazile in an extraordinary moment of truth-telling and clarity, which, of course, you see every so often with the woman as she goes through life. She switches magically from one position to another. I mean, it's extraordinary talent that she has, if you can call it a talent.
So I was trying to find, as I was preparing for the interview, where you might have referenced her book. I'm going through the endnotes, and I see a picture of you that I sort of recognize you holding a sign.
Yes. Yep, I've got that in
Philadelphia.
Yes. I was. There's actually a picture of me in the book holding that.
Right, on page 264.
I have it in my office. What's that?
On page 264.
Page 264? Okay. Yeah.
So that was in Thomas Paine Plaza.
Yeah.
And you attended our rally, the Bernier bus rally.
Yeah. That was. I remember the rally like it was yesterday. It was. I think it was a very important moment. I'm surprised. Looking back, I'm surprised that there weren't more people there. And that it hadn't overwhelmed the entire city. But I think the intensity that was flowing from that rally was unmistakable. And I think that anybody who had actually stopped to listen to what people were saying and to really think about it would see the events unfolding down the road as they sort of have, with respect. But it's I think it was an extraordinary moment of energy. I mean, I remember. There weren't too many media covering that rally, but there was one Norwegian reporter that asked me, actually came and was interviewing people and asked me a question. That was also very telling, the lack of media coverage.
Right, yeah, Reuters said Reuters was going to cover it, and then they never showed up. So it's not surprising. There was a really widespread suppression of that movement and that whole strategy. The media did not want Democrats to find out about that. So I'm just curious then, in election time, and of course it's a secret ballot, so you don't have to answer the question, but who did you end up voting for in the November?
I voted for Jill Stein.
Okay, which was one of the Bernier bus positions.
Yeah.
So you had a jam pack, as you already said, to create videos in support of Bernie Sanders. If Bernie runs in 2020, and it sounds like he might, and you have a PAC, we have a PAC, the nurses had a super PAC also that they were raising money and running ads for him as well. What advice would you offer Bernie Sanders specifically with regard to super PAC support? Because he was really against it, even though there were several super PACs supporting him.
Well, I don't think he would ever take my advice on anything. And I guess it's a very interesting question, but I guess the question I have is, and maybe I would have a question for him at this point is what is your aim? What is your aim? I think, for me, there's been such a division between the Bernie Sanders before the convention and the Bernie Sanders after the convention. They're like two different people. And, for me personally, as somebody who is very much a Bernie Sanders supporter, along with my wife, it feels to me that those positions aren't necessarily compatible. And so I've got, before I would give him any advice on PACs, I would want to know what his aim is with respect to the political situation we're in as a country. Because I think there are a number of different ways you can see the situation. But I'm not sure what his objectives are, and I'm not sure that there may be a possibility that I disagree with his objectives at this point.
Let's come back around to that in a few minutes
Okay.
toward the end, because I have another question that I want to follow up your answer with. You write about legislation that was passed to stymie class action lawsuits in your book.
Right.
Which I believe Bill Clinton signed.
Yep.
Why do you think this has taken place? Do you think it has to do with the Lewis Powell memo secret memo to the Chamber of Commerce, or is it to do with the broad onslaught and acceptance of neoliberalism as a political philosophy of the two major parties? Why do you think that the courts are and Congress is making this more difficult for people to get restitution, legal?
Yeah, great question. So, my view of it is that the class action device was actually, in its beginning, was actually a very effective legal device at holding corporations accountable. And the corporations, and this is in the 70s, realized that they had made a horrible mistake by letting this legislation sail through, the new class action legislation that really started in the late 60s and birthed the modern class action. And so they organized very quickly among themselves and embarked on a really decades-long campaign to eviscerate the class action. And so it became a war between the big plaintiffs' class action firms on the one hand, the defense firms on the others, and representing their clients, of course, being the corporations, acting in a very organized, effective manner. And as a result, here we are in 2018, and class actions have been greatly eviscerated from what they used to be, which for a short moment in history, I think they were a very potent force for keeping corporations accountable in various areas.
Do you think that the United States has become a corporate state?
I would call it an oligarchy that is in which the power is exercised largely through corporations. So in that sense, in the sense of the meaning of a corporate state, yes, I mean, I think corporations play an outsized role in this government, and throughout the course of history, there have been other examples of governments like that, such as Nazi Germany, and they don't generally turn out too well. It's not a great development.
So the Democratic Party just changed their rules. They now aren't going to allow the superdelegates to vote in the first round at the National Convention for president. Do you think that the party is redeemable?
No, I don't think the party is redeemable. I think the reform that you mentioned, that's just one sort of window dressing to make it look like they're reforming the party, but in a whole other host of areas, everything from allowing joint fundraising agreements to give the DNC chair full discretion as to whether somebody can actually run for president. I mean, this is an amazing power that was just handed over to the DNC chair. I mean, Donna Brazile came right out on Twitter after these so-called reforms were passed and said that, it doesn't matter what they do with superdelegates. We can always find a way to set the table. In other words,
she came right out and admitted it.
Yeah, she came right. They're very shameless about it, and they're shameless because they have become puppets for, puppets on behalf of this oligarchic structure we have in government. And I think a lot of it is exercised through the political parties. And I don't think the DNC is redeemable because I think it's totally corrupted. The whole concept is corrupted.
If Bernie runs in 2020 as a Democrat, do you think you're going to be supporting him?
I'm really not interested in electoral politics in the same way I used to be, I guess. I don't really see myself ever getting involved in a you know in a primary, either emotionally or as a supporter, because I just think that there's so much rigging in the system that it's sort of a pointless process. I'm more interested in how people such as Bernie Sanders present themselves in the media, because I think that's where a lot of the real struggle is going on, is quite frankly against this very, very dishonest mainstream media, which I think people are waking up to in droves around the country. And you know what you know I very much disagree with on when it comes to Bernie Sanders is the fact that he has not challenged the media at any level. He's not, and the media really was a central participant in the rigging of the primaries against him. So you can say what you want to say about him not taking on the DNC itself, and I know there's a lot of disagreement among Bernie supporters about, you know, whether he should be conciliatory with the DNC and work within that framework as much as possible to change the party, or you know, whether he should, you know, break with the DNC, which, you know, I think a lot of people would rather see happen. But you know, when it comes to the media, he never takes on the media, and I think that's just a lot. You know, personally, I have a lot of frustration with that, and that's something that Trump, to his credit, is very good at, and doesn't hesitate to take shots at the media, because I really do think the media is one of the true enemies that we're facing as a people right now.
Yeah, and they certainly were Bernie's enemies, much the way they were Trump's.
Right.
And Bernie addressed this in his book, Outsider in the House, which he changed when he ran for president, Outsider in the White House. He talked about breaking up the media and so forth, and really taking them on. And then you just didn't hear that much about it, even though the media were marching in lockstep with the Clinton campaign. Yes. Under their direction.
Well, a lot of people have Bernie to thanks for you know, opening their eyes to the concept of oligarchy as applying to the U.S. as a political concept. And you know, it's interesting because, you know, on the one hand, he's provided a frame of reference that I think has allowed people to see the government in a truer light than ever before. But on the other hand, he remains a player within that framework. And so, you know, within, you know, the person of Bernie Sanders, there's a lot of ambiguity sometimes.
Let's come around to that question then that we set off on the table before. What questions would you ask Bernie Sanders? Whether he runs or not. Let's say you had a meeting with him and you had a chance to ask him some questions. What would they be?
Well, I would certainly be interested to understand what his change what's behind his obvious change of thinking, that you know, cultivating third parties would be a good thing for American democracy, or the recovery of American democracy, and this new stance which he is taking, which is you know, work within the Democratic Party and drive everything to the Democratic Party. That's clearly his strategy. So what has he seen to justify that shift, or, you know, what has caused him to make that shift? Because it's a clear contradiction, I think.
Yeah. Any other questions that you would ask that you want to know about in his thinking?
You know, I don't want to say too much beyond that, because, you know, look, we have a lawsuit going against the DNC, and you know, the defendants in that lawsuit are you know, not just the Democratic National Committee, but Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz, and you know, we're on appeal in that case. We have oral argument set for next month. Conceivably, the court could reverse the lower court and send us back down to the trial court, in which case, you know, among a lot of different people, Bernie Sanders would be a material witness in that case, because the rigging of the primaries deals with him and his campaign personally. So I don't want to go too much beyond the sort of the theoretical in thinking about that, because I don't want to prejudice preparation of that deposition, so to speak.
In taking on this lawsuit, what has been the biggest hardship on your part? Have you had threats? Have you
Well,
experienced financial? I mean, what has been the biggest?
Well, the biggest,
hardship?
definitely the biggest thing has been dealing with the deaths of Sean Lucas and Seth Rich. Sean Lucas was somebody that my wife hired to serve the DNC. She hired the company that hired him, and he actually volunteered to serve the DNC. And so, when he showed up dead on his girlfriend's bathroom door, and we got a Facebook message about it, it was, great shock. And I still don't know what to make of that. Obviously there are a lot of people come with us to theories as to why they think Sean died, and they suggest to us that the report of 3 different toxic chemicals in his bloodstream, one of them toxic, fentanyl. They tell us, well, look, that we don't think that's an accident, as the DC police has told you, but we haven't investigated that case. But to deal with that, and then to deal with Seth Rich, and this pattern of dead witnesses. I mean, this is something you usually don't deal with in litigation. So having to, that is by far the biggest thing. I mean, and it's something, that you don't learn how to deal with in law school. I mean, it's not like you learn that much in law school, but that's definitely something they don't teach you.
Pattern of dead witnesses is a long Clintonian tradition.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to, part of dealing with that has to maybe come to grips with the fact that this country has a pattern of that, and that, this is just, something that that happens in this country, and has happened for many decades, going back, not just to JFK, but, before then, and we still haven't come to grips with the fact that the government took out JFK. And that's it's incredible. I mean, it's incredible that you can go through life as an American and consider yourself to be well educated and well versed in American history, and yet still not, be familiar with that concept.
Right. Just a couple more quick questions then. First, how do people find your book if they want to read it?
Well, I mean, first you can check your local library. I know that there's a lot of people have purchased copies for their library, so that would be the first place I'd check. And if you want to buy a copy, you can go. You can get a Kindle version for $9.99. I think it's like $3 more on Amazon for a paperback, or you can go to Barnes and Noble. And I've seen some in like independent bookstores, but it's less available. I mean, it's not like unfortunately, the selection at bookstores, has become less and less diverse, at least in my experience. But those are the various ways you can get a copy.
And why would people listening to this, knowing some parts of the book, knowing the story of Sean and what you've conveyed during this interview, and what they've picked up in the alternative media about your lawsuit, why would anyone want to go and read this book?
Yeah, I mean, I would actually, I would think the number one motivation would be to hand it to somebody that they want to convince of what they already know, but they have a hard time explaining. That would be that was sort of what I had in my mind when I wrote the book, which is, when you're a lawyer, and you've got a jury in front of you and you're trying a case, you have to persuade, and you start from a position of no credibility, and you have to continue to build up credibility over time. And so that was the tack I took. So it's something that you can give to, say, a family member or a colleague or a neighbor or so on, and say, hey, look, I don't want to go back and forth and have these hotly charged discussions in which we're yelling at each other and we're not getting our point across. But maybe, if you take your time and read this book, you'll see how the evidence is laid out, and how, yes, it is true that the DNC rigged the primary against Bernie Sanders. And, yes, it is true that the DNC, the Democratic Party, has nothing to do with democracy and everything to do with suppressing the progressive movement in the United States. And that's been true for many, many years. And, those are the central points that I try to make. And I try to put it in a way that is digestible to somebody who might come to the book with, skepticism or questions, or, maybe even hostility. But hopefully they'll give the book a chance. And this is a way that we can get more people awake to the reality of the political situation.
Jared, thanks for joining me this afternoon. Appreciate your time.
Well, thank you, Victor. I really enjoyed your questions. Those very, very, very good questions, and I enjoyed the discussion very much.
Thank you.
Revolt Against Plutocracy won't just be covering the news about the necessary revolution in the United States. Sometimes we'll be making the news. If you want to stay on top of the revolutionary actions and strategies of grassroots, genuine progressives, and our allies, please subscribe to our YouTube channel today.